A new survey of some 36,000 Kroger employees across 3 states has revealed just how devastating the strain of low wages and lack of government aid has been on some members of the working class. Nearly half of all respondents said they could not afford to eat healthy and balanced meals in the past year, while a sobering 34% said they'd skipped or reduced the size of meals because they couldn't afford food. 15% have used food banks or government food assistance to help pay for groceries. 63% of respondents said they did not earn enough money to pay for expenses every month, and 14% said they had experienced homelessness in the past year.
This comes only a few months after Kroger canceled its $2 per hour hazard pay in May and initiated a cash-grubbing stock buyback plan to the tune of $1 billion with a B in December. Meanwhile, BuzzFeed reports that Kroger's annual revenue rose 8% in 2021 to $132 billion. Senior executives each made a salary of at least $5 million in 2020, with CEO Rodney McMullen earning $22 million, nearly double his 2018 pay. Here to weigh in is Team Rising, Max Alvarez. He's the host of the Working People podcast and editor-in-chief of The Real News. Brett Lloyd is president and CEO of the Bullfinch Group. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you for having us.
So Max was already shaking his head, and Max covers these issues every single day. So Brett, I'm going to start with you and ask, when you see the juxtaposition between the revenue increases and the CEO and executive pay, and then the economic woes of Kroger employees, is that not a sort of very difficult circle to square? Is that not a very upsetting juxtaposition that conservatives should start addressing in their discussions about wealth inequality?
Oh, absolutely. And let me just say this isn't just Kroger either. This is something that we're going to be seeing with many grocery stores across the nation. With inflation, costs of goods and services being paramount to people right now in America, and then seeing wages like $22 million for a grocery store CEO, this is going to be something that's very problematic for the American people, not just for Kroger, but for any of their local grocery stores. And we're going to have to probably see some elected officials step in and start taking care of this with inflation on the rise, price of goods and services, groceries. This is something that is really becoming paramount in America.
And Max, it just feels like everything is tied up in this Kroger situation. None of it is foreign. None of it is alien. None of it is really surprising. But the combination of all of it together in one soup, and the way it's playing out here is striking. What was the part of it that's most significant to you?
Well, I'll start by saying that right now, as we record this on Wednesday, UFCW Local 7 out in Colorado is hitting the picket line, and that represents workers at King Soopers and City Market, both of which are owned by Kroger. So shout out to Local 7, don't cross the picket line. I think you're right, Ryan, like that this is sort of like a microcosmic example of everything that's wrong with this economy, and also, links back to things that we've already talked about amidst this sort of, wave of increasing labor militancy, the strikes that we saw in 2021, the Great Resignation, so on and so forth. A lot of it, if you're trying to explain what we have seen over the past year, I think you can find a lot of it in this struggle here against Kroger, because this did not happen overnight. Rodney McMullen and this entire executive team has, done what capitalists always do, right? Which is take this thing and try to figure out how to make it more profitable. And the ways that they have done that have directly translated to misery and economic disadvantages for its workers. Because some of the really striking things that I looked at in the Economic Roundtable's breakdown of this survey, I'll just pull some key ones, some of which were already mentioned. Kroger workers' exceptionally high rate of food insecurity is 7 times greater than the U.S. average. Kroger, and this is a really important one, Kroger is the only employer for 86% of their workers, and yet more than 2/3 of Kroger workers struggle to survive due to low wages and part-time schedules. So that is what I mean by these MBA people coming in thinking they're geniuses by saying, well, instead of just having 40-hour-a-week workers, why don't we schedule people, but have their schedules change every week, sometimes every day, so they can't get other jobs, and we pay them less, basically. So like this is what it looks like when you try to sort of like apply your MBA type principles. It does to a business. It translates to pain and misery for working people. And Kroger has been doing this deliberately for years. This is not, like this is not an aberration. This is part of what they have been doing to serve their shareholders at the expense of.
Yeah, and I think it's a good microcosm for all of the reasons you guys were talking about, but also of the sort of when you have rising revenue and then also rising wealth for the executives and the people at the top of the company, that doesn't, let's use a phrase, trickle down. So a new piece from the Washington Post analyzes blue-collar voters shift away from the Democratic Party, with author Stephen Brint writing, quote, blue-collar workers' greater economic insecurity is encouraging conservatism rather than liberalism, while professionals and managers are heading in the other direction. So Max, I'm going to go back to you on this question first and ask, there's a distinction here. It's not just that a lot of workers are leaving the Democratic Party and not voting for the Democratic Party. On the right, there's actually been some pickup of those voters. It hasn't been quite a stampede yet, but it's not just that voters aren't voting for Democrats, but it is that they are, in many cases now, voting for Republicans. Why do you think that is?
So I'll say two things. One is a tiny parenthesis, because I would be remiss if I didn't mention it in regards to the Kroger thing. But I would encourage people to Google the name Evan Seyfried. I interviewed Evan Seyfried's family. Evan was a 20-year Kroger worker in Ohio who, according to a court filing from the family, was bullied by management at Kroger into committing suicide. And I think that I have to mention him because his family directly attributes his death to these kinds of changes in management, and that's why Evan did not get the help that he needed when he asked for it from Kroger. To respond to your question, Emily, I think that in a lot of ways, this isn't like some grand mystery, right? I think that this study that the Washington Post is reporting on is both really interesting and also, really obvious, because what it kind of shows is that, the more economically disadvantaged you are, the more you're going to prioritize that in your political calculations. Whereas the more financially well off you are, the more financially secure you are, the more that you can start to think about more quote unquote liberal or left leaning positions and make those the focus of your politics. The problem is that in the United States, we make working people choose between one or the other. And then the corporate media jumps on it and says, well, workers don't want any of this social justice crap. They only want, to focus on their jobs. Again, it's like, if you just talk to anyone or think about, your own self, you can realize that that's not actually that big of a conundrum. I always think about my dad, a Mexican immigrant who lost everything, including our house in the recession, and voted for Donald Trump. Did he hate Donald Trump's, rhetoric about Mexicans? Of course he did. But at the time, he felt so desperate that the only person he thought may give him a shot to recover financially was Donald Trump. That doesn't mean that he was inherently kind of so conservative that he hated these social justice things. It means that in this sort of system, people are made to choose, and they're going to prioritize their immediate material needs because that's what we all do, right? But they're not at odds with each other. They only look that way in the electoral realm.
And Brett, I think
priorities. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. But I wanted you to pick up on that, but particularly following up on the question of delivering. So Trump can certainly speak to Max's dad, but can he actually deliver for Max's dad? And I would say that in this Kroger case and this Washington Post article, this Washington Post poll, they point to the way that the right, and including the populist right, is almost incapable of delivering materially for people like this, because workers in these situations need community, and they need to be organized. Disorganized, kind of just purely individualized workers are going to then veer off to the right, and they're not going to support the kind of policies that can raise them up economically, which then gives them the time to have leisure, go to baseball games, play softball games, to do the kinds of things that build community, the kinds of things that you're talking about. So there's this contradiction between what the CEO of Kroger wants and what the populist right needs in order to raise people's material standards. So how do you kind of sort that out?
I think prioritization is absolutely correct in this, and in looking towards 2022, and and this issue with Kroger that we're talking about. When we have a disaster or a pandemic in America, grocery store workers and paramedics, I think, are paramount priority. You run to the grocery store, you need the frontline workers to be able to sell you the goods and services that you need. You need the paramedics to be there to assist with the health. But that priority, I think, is going to be a problem that Democrats are running into, and they'll run into for the next 11 months in America. When we look at what Americans see as the most pressing issues in America, AP came out with a poll, and we see that COVID is down from last year in terms of what's most important for government officials to be rectifying, where economy and costs of goods and services are way up. Well, economy's stagnant, but that's still over 2/3 of Americans say that that's the number one issue. We had a Reuters poll out earlier this week, and it was asking the same question: what should government officials focus on in 2022? And we have Republicans and independents both saying economy, and we have Democrats saying public health, illness, and disease. Public health, illness, and disease in an election year is number 5th to independents in terms of priority. So I think that Democrats, in order to do well in 2022, I think need to understand how their priorities and the priorities of independents in a midterm election can be squared. And right now, I'm not too sure that the priorities between Democrats and independents are meshing very well.
Yeah.
Well, and just one quick kind of addendum to that, right? Is because Emily, you kind of already pointed this out, and this is where the Democrats, I mean, I'm already seeing so many of these kind of high-ranking officials just, revive that sort of 1990s, it's the economy stupid talking point. What they still have not learned, right, is, because if you look at that, you might think, based on what I just said, is that should be a winning message because people do care about their economic situation. What the Democrats have not yet learned is that for most people, there is a separate economy from the one with the lines, with the charts that have the lines going up. Just like, Kroger is over here touting, record revenue, and its CEO and executives are making, massive profits for themselves while squeezing workers. The economy that Biden and his acolytes keep pointing to is only working for a certain segment of the population. So if you actually want to get people on your side, it's very simple. Deliver for working people. They will show up for you if their lives are getting better. But for the Democratic kind of strategic DC class, it's all just messaging. How do we tweak our messaging without actually doing anything to help people's lives to get them to the polls every 4 years? And we don't have time for this crap anymore. We need to actually be helping people, and people need a reason to actually go to the polls. The fact that we could have this much economic deprivation, this much inequality, this much social dysfunction, a public health crisis, and people still feel like they don't have enough of a reason to vote for either of these two parties is just the biggest glaring sign that we have that neither of these two parties is currently representing the people who desperately need representation.
Right. Max and Brett, thank you both so much for your insights on this topic.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.